So, hi and welcome. I've seen a lot of people in my TikTok comment sections expressing interest in learning about the story of Sleep Token, but either haven't really found the means to do so or don't really know where to start. I tried making a sort of comprehensive video about this in the short form on TikTok, but despite almost talking for 10 whole minutes, I didn't really say anything. So I wanted to see if I could make an actual comprehensive video here, since now I can edit and YouTube videos allow me the time to actually talk. So, because I've been hyperfixating on this band since August of last year, I want to try to educate the masses properly this time and yap about something I love dearly for my own benefit. Because while the band's mystique is fun as a gimmick, it does make it extremely hard to learn anything concrete about them, especially if you're new, and especially since there's so much conflicting information on the internet about what the story of this band's work is even about. But I want to try to get people to understand this band a little bit better, because I really like them, and I've had a lot of fun learning their story and listening to their music and hearing all the different interpretations that people have to say about them. And if this video gets other people to understand this band more, or even convinces them to get into this band, then awesome. So, to new converts or older acolytes alike, I invite you to take a walk with me, out of the frying pan and straight into the funeral pyre, as I attempt to explain to you what's going on with Sleep Token. If we're going down the route of Sleep Token for Dummies, I might as well go all the way back. Sleep Token is an anonymous band that formed in 2016, and their first song was released on September 8th of that same year, a track called Thread the Needle in their first EP, only titled One, followed quickly by their second, Two, Haha. They've released 3 full albums since their debut, with a couple of singles and covers along the way. Their first album, Sundowning, coming out in 2019, their second one, This Place Will Become Your Tomb, releasing in 2021, and Take Me Back to Eden, releasing in 2023 as their most recent. They're known a bit more for metal or metalcore now, but their music is notoriously not shackled to one single genre, implementing funk, R&B, and pop-like elements into their works, oftentimes featuring all of those even within the same song. The band is anonymous, as I'm sure most people know, and as I mentioned earlier, and it's their main gimmick. So it makes sense that we don't hear much from them, but they really do go above and beyond with keeping things as vague and open to interpretation as humanly possible, which is awesome to leave room for people to interpret things how they'd like, but horrific and awful and terrible for establishing literally anything with any sort of clarity. In one of the only 2 spoken interviews with them, Vessel describes the band's formation as, quote, "He encountered sleep in a dream, with a promise of glory and magnificence if Vessel followed him," end quote. And the only other time I could ever recall Vessel describing any intent regarding his music was in 2022, in one of the From the Room Below shows and Lafayette, in an automated message where he said, quote, "All I have ever given anyone was a small window into the emotional waiting room of my mind," end quote. So, not much at all to go off of in terms of story or intent. I only start with this because I've seen this sentiment a lot, that people think the lore of this band is just so deep and complex and confusing that it's inaccessible to newer fans only because it's so involved. But the thing is, it's not that the story is inaccessible. There's really just nothing to access in the first place. So don't worry if you feel lost or behind in terms of not knowing anything, because really, none of us know anything. Not really, anyway. Both of those quotes I provided earlier are part of the very limited stock of things Sleep Token have ever directly said about their music. And even within those interviews, they are extremely vague in their language, and they tend to answer questions with things like worship and nothing lasts forever. Go girl, give us absolutely nothing. Essentially, what I'm saying is that every single thing you have ever heard about Sleep Token's story in those huge Reddit threads or 5-minute long TikToks is all purely fan speculation, as is every other interpretation of their work. Like, in terms of actual authorial intent about what any of their songs mean from the band themselves, we have nothing. We have actually nothing, and that is not a joke. There is no one true canon or timeline or anything when it comes to Sleep Token's work, and considering the band's track record with telling us actually nothing about anything ever, it will likely stay that way forever. Okay, hi, editing Koi here. So they've decided to release a graphic novel with, like, canonized lore, so this kind of throws a wrench in all that. But we'll get back to the graphic novel later, just keep that in mind. Like, put a pin in the graphic novel because we will get to that. So, with that said, let's just start out with some things that are concrete, so we're at least a little bit grounded in reality. Let's start by introducing who you'll see on stage at the rituals. Before we get into talking about the band members, I just want to say that I will not be using their actual names and will only ever refer to them by their aliases. In the fandom at large, it's very much frowned upon to refer to the real people behind the band, because for most fans, they feel that if they wanted to include their face with their art, they would have done so already. Not to mention the fact that their names were leaked via malicious doxing, and it's clear that they don't want their names associated with their music. So out of respect for that boundary, you will not see them referred to by their actual names in this video at any point. The band is led by their frontman, who goes only by Vessel. He provides leading vocals when live, and also provides every other instrument apart from the drums in the studio recordings, as well as vocals. He's gone through a couple of costume variations, but you can identify him by the fact that, one, he never worked. Love this for him. He said, "My identity has to be hidden, but my tits will not be." And he's consistently worn a long, black hooded cloak paired with a mostly white mask, with the mouth becoming more exposed as time goes on. He's very hard to lose on stage, not only because of the distinct, almost Dark Souls-looking costume choice, which is wildly different from what the rest of the band wears, but also because of his movements. Revolver magazine describing it as, quote, "Vessel moves like he is visibly encumbered by something. At points, he moves skittishly, as if startled, sometimes devolving into an odd, jumpy dance." End quote. As a quick side note, technically the main 4 members are all called Vessel 1, Vessel 2, Vessel 3, and Vessel 4, but for the sake of simplicity, we'll just be calling them Vessel 2, 3, and 4. And also just because no one in the fan community ever refers to them by that full alias, it's just what's on the song credits, but it's not what anybody calls them. Anyways, next up on the docket is 2, the drummer. He's the other founding member of Sleep Token and is the only other one of the Vessels to be featured in the song credits of the studio recordings. He's also really easy to identify because he never leaves the drum kit, but other members will often walk up to his platform to, what I can only lovingly call bug him, putting little hats on him and such. He's gone through a couple of outfit changes too, but they're not really big enough to note other than the big change, but I'll talk about that in full at the end of this section. If you want to see more of 2 specifically, check out this video by Drumeo. Dude won Best Metal Drummer of the Year, so it's very worth the watch. 3 is the band's bassist, at least for the live shows. Both him and their guitarist are not given any sort of song credits in the studio recordings, so it's a bit unclear whether they've actually been brought on as a more permanent addition, or if they're just a live addition of hired hands. And to my knowledge, there have been a few separate people that have served the role of bassist and guitarist over time, as well as having a keyboardist in the earlier days of the band. However, both of them having a steady social media presence has given people hope that they are a more permanent addition, but you can identify current 3 in a couple of ways. He's the one who interacts with the other members of the band the most often, and he's the most playful, I think. He fights with and interacts a lot with Vessel, and you can see him leaning a lot on 4. He's also the only person on stage who has ever had his hair exposed, so if you see somebody headbanging, it's always going to be 3. Their guitarist goes by 4, but interestingly, he's also the only one with a widely known nickname other than his alias. The fanbase has taken to calling him IV instead of 4. It may seem confusing as to why they do this, but the Roman numeral for 4, which looks like an I and a V, can be pronounced phonetically a lot easier than the others, as in, no one's calling 2 II, but you can get away with doing that to IV. Even Ollie Sykes from Bring Me the Horizon has called him IV when he performed on stage with them, which has basically cemented the nickname in the eyes of the fandom. And finally, there are the Espera. No, I speak Spanish too. I know it's spelt the same as Espera. They're not the Waits, okay? They're the Espera. They are only a live show edition, and while they've been called the Veselettes in the past, they are an actual separate music group called Espera Background Vocals who aren't only associated with Sleep Token. And it's been said before that they don't like being called that, so don't call them the Veselettes. They provide, like the name implies, backing vocals that add a really interesting texture to their live shows and are honestly really ethereal and just lovely, especially in their performances in the From the Room Below rituals, literally chill-inducing. They've all gone through some costume variations of some sort. In the earlier days of the band, Vessel wore a much more complete face mask, and the other members of the band wore white balaclava-style masks. Vessel's costume was also a lot less elaborate and much less accessorized, but he's kept the body paint and open cloak in every iteration. After the white mask era, they switched it up to black balaclavas with the Watcher symbol on the front, while Vessel switched his mask a few times. And in the modern era comes the big change I mentioned earlier. The masks become even more elaborate, every member getting an individualized mask and look, looking almost Slipknot-esque in nature. Even the Espera got new masks as well as another new outfit. This decision was initially controversial, but it seems the newer masks just took a bit to grow in the community, because I haven't really seen any pushback since the first week or so of this change. And as a plus, it's now a lot easier to identify all of the members on stage, especially if you're an idiot like me and don't know the difference between a bass guitar and a guitar. Anyways, moving away from the performers, let's see if we have anything concrete to go off of story-wise. Before I continue on with this section, I want to say that this entire script was written before the graphic novel announcement and its sneak peeks came out. I'll talk about what we've gotten in the graphic novel so far, and then I'll talk about the albums in the next section. God, they want me dead. The band's decided to release a graphic novel that has been explicitly stated to have actual canon lore in it, which is huge for a band whose most explicit hints of further story are Vessel posting things like this. With the Sleep Token graphic novel teasers, they released this image, which one user, Paradox Bunny on Twitter, has valiantly tried to transcribe because bad image quality. I'm going to read it to you in full now because I'm going to talk about this more in length. Case File 01. 15 days since emergence of the lunar anomaly. When I was a child, I was frequently beset by certain recurring dreams. There is one such dream that I remember more than most, one in which I found myself standing on a vast shoreline gazing out at a flat, wide sea. Slowly, as I watched, the horizon gradually began to lift. Before long, I was able to observe that this lifting expanse was approaching me, a wall of smooth, black water that curled into an impossible lip at its peak. Rather surprisingly, I do not recall being afraid at such an ominous sight. Well, to be more precise, I was afraid. I was terrified, but not of the wave itself. It was the thought of what was beyond it, the vast unstoppable force swooping forth to herald the end of everything, to drown the world and then eventually sink back into itself. A careless shrug of entropy, enough to sever the thread of all fates. I felt that I were somehow to survive this limitless tide, then I would be left in a world that would not recognize me. I would become an element unto myself, and myself alone. An echo stuck in the throat of a dead god. Yet here I am. It has been over 2 weeks since the emergence of the lunar anomaly. Our team spent nearly 2 years attempting to anticipate what this event would mean for humanity, analyzing endless of lunar topography along every known form of spectroscopy, all amounting to one hopeless conclusion: to burrow into the bowels of the earth and simply that whatever emerged from within would reach us last. As it would turn out, this one final act of humble surrender is what won the last of us the right to our own lives in these final days. Those of us alive now are not those who sought to barter with destiny and defiantly cling to a civilized existence at all. Of this phenomenon, we were best served by our most base instincts, where shame found me place to, who spend their hubris and desperately hid down in the mud like rats. Made every effort to warn the others, though naturally we could not provide much of a basis upon. The species was facing imminent and utter demise beside a few fissures at the southern lunar pole. With underground agility once we realized that the moon's orbit was rapidly decaying in a war that was physical model. I find it hard to believe that none of them followed out lead. Perhaps some of them of knowing now. Surface expedition were, at best. In all honesty, I was shocked to discover that our initial a breathable atmosphere. Perhaps in all this turmoil, I found it easier to commit my mind to the turn. The event, despite 2 years of efforts, didn't prepare us for the havoc we now face. To say that explain the phenomenon would be a gratuitous understatement. The cataclysm that occurred 2 weeks about this new world we now hid beneath. To gaze upon the moon is to die. Wearable counter for the surface teams that would prove vital in allowing them to copied have known that this was far from the only threat that them. To say that we find the phenomena would be a gratuitous understatement, is affected by the lunar anomaly, but that of all life, albeit in vastly different ways, of emergent biology is beyond the boundaries of what we are able to study and understand. Guilt over those we lost. More than that, however, I feel more guilt about the way I reacted to elements that attached to our team. I felt strangely comforted, despite the deeply disturbing nature of arrived, at the conclusion that this feeling came from a sense of familiarity, human beings fighting, that has plagued us all since time immemorial, but here in the wake of such a deeply unfamiliar and it's hard not to feel almost comforted by such an immediately recognizable problem. Yourself, deeply troubled by the prospect of humans remaining on the surface in that state, is that their actions were not of their own will, though there is every chance this is a preference over the alternative. The precious remnants of human life in the desire to understand what has happened, though in perhaps this is the only way we can cling to our humanity, by continuing our constant battle, the very end. So, that was a lot. From what I can gather from this snippet, the graphic novel seems like a prequel of sorts to the modern events of the story of Sleep Token that we know, and we have some sort of anomalous situation going on with our moon. Which, in retrospect, makes a lot of sense considering the Take Me Back to Eden album cover art, and that actually seems to be accurate, since the file mentions the fissures at the southern lunar pole being the place where the anomaly came from. According to this case file, the moon's orbit had started to decay, which basically means it's just gotten closer to the Earth, and it's led to some kind of catastrophic event for the planet. Because the writer has said that to look upon the moon means to die, it seems what's left of humanity has started living underground, because apparently exposure to the moon in any way, like looking at it, means trouble, and any humans remaining on the surface have seemingly seemingly been infected with something, considering the writer also mentions that they're in some sort of altered state. There's also a hint of alien emerging biology, as they call it, since the writer claims to have never seen anything like it before, and it's beyond their ability to study. Apparently, one of the extra special tiers of people who bought the novel are getting a series of surface field notes, so we'll see what that yields. As a side note, the dreams that were mentioned at the start is also interesting. It sort of ties back to the idea that Sleep came to Vessel in a dream, and just for fun, I wanted to include the little fan theory that some of these videos right here are the dreams that Sleep showed the band when it promised them fame and power and whatnot. But the novel doesn't start shipping out until November, so we'll have to wait and see how that story pans out. I might make a follow-up video on the novel itself if people end up liking this one. I said before that we have no idea what's going on story-wise, and at least for the albums, that's mostly true. But there is a sort of universally accepted series of events going on, and I'm going to attempt to explain the most basic concepts of the album's story here before we get too far into fan theory territory. The story of Sleep Token's 3-album saga is pretty universally recognized as Vessel trying to work through his abusive relationship with Sleep, which is the deity he mentioned in one of their earliest interviews. But even this is sort of contested, because Sleep is referred to with masculine pronouns on their social medias and in their interviews, but the songs only ever mention the love interest, which is assumed to be Sleep, because there's no evidence of there being another love interest or prominent character, with feminine pronouns. So, again, with the vagueness. Even Sleep's deific status is sort of a contentious point, because some people think it could just be more of a metaphor for someone with a lot of power over Vessel, to the point where he deifies them emotionally rather than an actual literal god. But both interpretations are about as popular as each other from what I've seen, and considering the graphic novel stuff, I'm willing to start putting bets on it being the latter. I want to take the time now to go over a couple of popular fan theories that can further flesh out the story a bit, even though they're technically non-canon, and then I'll give my own interpretation and a bit of my own analysis at the very end. This one, I believe, is the most simple of all the fan theory ideas, but it's probably the one I've seen talked about the most in my own personal comment section, so I do think it's worth mentioning. In this idea, the story goes that before Vessel met Sleep, there was Eden, usually thought of as an ex-lover who either wasn't as horrible to Vessel as Sleep is, or was even a good influence on him. And the songs that are referencing Eden, or even just gardens in general, are in fact referencing this supposed past love. The Garden of Eden, for those who don't know the reference, was written about in the Old Testament as a paradise on Earth, and is the site for the fall of humanity. It's where Eve ate the apple from the forbidden tree of knowledge. I feel like that story is enough in the cultural lexicon that most people will know what I'm talking about. Some people also say that Eden is referencing the mental or emotional place Vessel was in when he was with her. Or, I've seen some people assume that Eden was real at some point but passed away, and Vessel is now pleading with Sleep to let him be with her again in the songs where the word Eden or where the concept of a garden is mentioned, and then that's the biggest source of conflict in their relationship. This theory comes to us by way of fellow YouTuber the RYSE Movement. It's an hour-longish video breaking down the idea that Sleep Token's 3-album saga is more of a story about Vessel's personal shadow work than anything else, featuring concepts based off of author and philosopher Carl Jung, going into detail about how Sleep may be less of an actual deity, and is instead Vessel's personal anima, which is defined as the hidden feminine part of a man's personality according to Jungian ideas. The theory goes on to describe how Sleep Token's 3-album saga is following the tale of Vessel, learning to reconnect with his more feminine half, and in turn learning to become a more well-rounded and whole person. It's a video very much tied to spirituality, so a lot of it went right over my head since I've just never felt particularly connected to things like that, but if that's more your wheelhouse, I think you'll enjoy this theory and this video. Regardless, it's a good watch and I encourage you to check it out. This video is less of a comprehensive theory and more of a sequential breakdown of all 3 of Sleep Token's full albums in order from Sundowning to Take Me Back to Eden. In this about hour-long video, YouTuber VYEN gives his own interpretation of the meaning of the songs and weaves a loose sort of timeline of events in an attempt to explain the relationship between Sleep and Vessel, as well as giving a thorough lyrical breakdown of most of their songs, and taking a bigger focus on the actual writing of the songs rather than personal interpretation. And even when he does veer off into theory territory, he provides solid evidence to back up his claims, and I think a lot of his ideas are very interesting and sort of break the mold of typical Sleep Token fan theories. I think the most important thing to note from this video is that he presents the idea that not all the songs are meant to be seen from Vessel's perspective, and I've seen this idea start to gain a bit of traction with more and more theories, which I think is really cool. It's also edited really, really well and extremely funny. Calling Vessel a white knight is the funniest thing I think I've ever heard about Sleep Token ever. I'm definitely biased, and this is my favorite set of interpretations I've seen by far. Please go check this video out, because even though the view count on this thing is pretty high, it is criminally underrated to me. I want to to quickly go over what I think of the previous theories before I went and delved into my own interpretation in full, so here we go. The Eden idea, or the idea that Eden is a person, really doesn't hold any water for me, I'm afraid. To me, and many others, Eden is more of a metaphor to describe a state of mind that Vessel was in before he started getting abused by sleep. The idea of take me back to Eden, to me, means more take me back to when I was in a healthier state of mind, rather than take me back to the person named Eden. No shade to anybody who latched onto this theory, it just seems like a very weirdly literal interpretation, and I just haven't found any evidence to really make me think this one is any good. I mentioned this briefly in the animus section, but while I do think this is a good video that has some good ideas, the spirituality stuff went straight over my head and made it really hard to get truly invested, but I can definitely see why people agree with it so much. The idea of sleep being a metaphor for Vessel trying to get more in touch with his artistic and sensitive side makes sense when you see just how passionate Vessel is on stage and how much raw heart is put into the band's lyricism specifically. If there's one thing Vessel has, it's definitely passion and heart. Exploring the concept is by far the one I agree with the most, mostly because his interpretations happen to match up the most with my own, and he introduced me to the concept of certain songs or certain verses being from the perspective of sleep, which irreversibly changed the way I listen to their music, and I found myself analyzing the lyrics in a way I hadn't before, and it was really the reason I wanted to start talking about Sleep Token lore. Again, I'm very biased, I think it's a good video. I think I have a very strange philosophy when it comes to fan interpretation of Sleep Token's universe and whatnot. Instead of going down the route I think most people take, which is a lot of lyrical analysis and a dissection of the music as an album, I've elected to take all of these little characters and smash them around like Barbie dolls while I try to come up with a pantheon that sleep is a part of, or how the cult of sleep works, or any other minutia that absolutely doesn't matter and doesn't make any sense in terms of analyzing an album, but which makes way more sense in the way of someone building a campaign for like the World of Darkness universe or something. So, in lieu of boring everybody by trying to provide this lengthy, game theory-esque timeline, I'll just share with you some fun ideas from my version of Sleep Token's universe thing, because this video is already long enough, good god, but maybe these ideas can just be a fun way to cap off the video. Sleep's physical form changes depending on the person who looks at it. Vessel sees something like this to explain all the naturalistic imagery he sings about. Sleep is the god of sleep and the moon, and has been in an ongoing war or at least constant conflict with other gods, and goes to Vessel to provide it with more energy when they're depleted. The concerts are a real thing in this universe, and they're meant to give Sleep more energy and recruit more people to the cult. The Espera were conjured up by Sleep, and as such are magical in this universe. Sleep found out that the most efficient way to replenish its energy is through the art of worship. Literally. They recruit artists into the cult because of the amount of attention an artist pays to their muse. Sleep Token's recent viral success didn't come from nowhere, and the story they've woven is a huge part of that, I think. Not only do they have genre-destroying music that truly does have a little something for everybody, but they play around with truly cool writing concepts for a band or an album to try and execute. Vessel's writing is nothing short of awe-inspiring, and I don't know how much of the written lore or hints of deeper story are directly because of him, but I wouldn't put it past him to have made it all. The story, or what little of it we've gotten, is deeply engaging and really cool, while still leaving room for people to try to figure out what exactly is going on for themselves. And while I've harped on them a lot for vagueness in this video, I do think that in the end that it was a good decision. I wouldn't have found all of these cool creators or fun ideas and thought-provoking interpretations of music that I adore otherwise. It's made me appreciate Sleep Token's discography all the more, and gotten me more invested in them somehow, which I just think is awesome. And with the graphic novel set to be released in November, who knows what else is on the horizon for this universe and this story. But that's all I have for you for now. Like I said at the start, I wanted to talk about Sleep Token because I really like them. This Yap session was written mostly for my own benefit, so I could gush about one of my interests. But if this video made somebody understand Sleep Token better or convince them to give them a go, then my work here is done. And maybe if I talk more about them in the future, the video won't be so heavy. I feel like a bad fantasy writer just throwing proper nouns at people. No explanation, but regardless. I hope you enjoyed the video. I tried to take everybody's suggestions and advice from my previous video, which was the first thing that I had ever edited ever, so I hope this one was a bit of an easier watch. I'm really looking forward to trying to fill out this channel more, and I'm hoping you guys will come on that journey with me. You can do that by pressing the subscribe button. God, that's still weird to say. I'm not used to saying that yet. Wanted to give one last shout out to a couple of people who really helped me out in making this behemoth of a video possible. Gondola Chills for providing the sound effects for me, and Reese Sliptican on Twitter for being my beta reader for this doozy of a script. Thank you guys so much for just giving little old me a helping hand. Anywho, that's it for this video. I'm going to listen to Take Aim 400,000 times and irreversibly demolish my Spotify rap statistics. Bye.